How's everybody doing today? Good? Thanks for joining a session that's right before happy hour. I commend you for that, and I'll try not to go too long or anything. And possibly, if there's questions, we can always do that over beers afterwards. Everybody here drinks beer, right? Nobody here drinks beer? Come on. Those two do. American beer. I'm Canadian, so, I mean, your light beer is our water, essentially, so that we don't get poisoned. But your regular beer is okay, I guess. It does all right. So welcome to my session. It is porting BlackBerry Java apps to BlackBerry 10. It's more of a presentation with some, I guess, a migration strategy for you, kind of how we go into our enterprises and how we work with our customers to help migrate their Java apps to BlackBerry 10. And there would be, at the end of the presentation, there's some tips and tricks on what you need to keep in mind when you start to build for mainly BlackBerry 10 and WebWorks. And how many of you guys are building Java apps now? So this is probably a good session for you. Do you all plan to build for BlackBerry 10? Everyone should shake their head yes. Absolutely. After the keynote today and the fact that you're here, you should definitely say yes. So this is going to help you, I guess, aid you in that progression to BlackBerry 10 if you don't know it already. So what more could you ask for from BlackBerry 10? You've all heard the development options. These are the main four that we're specifying. Obviously, they kind of branch into their own unique little development worlds. First and foremost, the HTML5 and WebWorks. That's what we deal in most of the time. Our team is built of enterprise mobility architects, and we've been working with HTML5 and WebWorks as long as I can remember, I guess, for the last couple of years anyway. And this has been in preparation for cross-platform and getting ready for new devices. We knew Java wasn't going to be around forever, and this was kind of our migration strategy. You can also build for the native SDK. Has everyone here heard of Cascades before? Did you know that Cascades and the NDK are the same thing? I'm supposed to really drive that home with you guys. Tim Neal gets very upset when you say Cascades is a development option and the NDK is a development option. They're the same thing. The next one there is ActionScript and Adobe Air. So this is just the Air runtime. This is, I think it's at 3.1 right now, the runtime, but we have committed to bring it up to the 3.4 spec, I believe, framework for Air. And I don't know timing on that, but I think they're aiming for around launch time. And the final one there on the left-hand side, or your right, I guess, is the Java Android runtime. Who can tell me why Java Android runtime isn't really that good for enterprise? Somebody? Bueller? Malware. Not all features, malware. Those are two good ones, but the main reason is because the runtime doesn't run in the corporate perimeter. Did you guys realize that? So on Playbook and on BlackBerry 10 right now, the Java Android runtime, you can't run an Android app, I guess, in the corporate perimeter, which is your secure enterprise container. So keep that in mind. Any questions on the different development options? Is there any that we haven't touched that people would like to develop in? Because you're all Java developers. I knew I shouldn't have asked that question. I know that's the sad part about that thing on the right, because you might be able to work in that space. But unfortunately, we aren't going to have a Java container. And don't take that up. Don't take that out on me, please. You can talk to the developer guys for that. Good. Feel free to slap them. All right, so your migration strategy and how we go about this with our enterprise customers. And the idea is start now. This thing is way too close to me, isn't it? Should I move it down? Sorry. Okay, so the migration strategy. What we do is our team actually goes into enterprise customers that have these applications, and we'll sit down with you, help you realize what needs to be migrated over from Java, And these are the different things that we've come across during these sessions. All right, so first off, what's the anatomy of a Java app? Essentially, this is what it breaks down to. Methods that do the work, classes which contain these methods, and UI. Those are the three main components of what a J2ME application is. And we say that most of your work is done, and I'm sure since all of you are Java developers, you realize this, is done around UI development. I mean, Java Swing is, when you get the hang of it, is easy enough, I guess, but there is a lot of coding that's done around UI in Java, especially when you have to take into considerations the different handheld models we have, the different OSs we have. Have all of you kind of come across that dilemma of, do I support a 4.2 device or a 5.0 or a 6.0 or a 7.0? I feel your pain. I've dealt with that for the last 5 years. And then, obviously, with the different phones and with them progressing, there's different capabilities and APIs that are available. So you have to take that into consideration, too. And I think we're getting more to an even playing field with capabilities on BlackBerry 10. Everything, you can't ask for much more, I guess, out of a phone. So in our experience, the amount of development time that's spent on UI in these enterprise accounts is around, you can see from the slide here, around 60 to 70% of the time. And the cool part here is that if you start to look at that and focus on your UI for building in WebWorks, you can really transition easier to BlackBerry 10. So in Java, you look at whether you're building pixel by pixel development, adding tons of layouts to the screen to make a component appear on in a given area, I guess. We talked about screen sizes already and the different code capabilities, so I'll move on to the next one. So this is migration step 1. Take your UI, migrate it over to Web UI, which essentially is HTML5, and these different UI frameworks that exist out there. Has everyone heard of the UI frameworks? jQuery, Sencha, Dojo, PhoneGap, kind of. All right, so use these to your advantage. It takes a lot of the effort out of the UI development for you. And then take your classes and start to identify the pieces that migrate over to either an HTML5 API, a WebWorks API, or third there, if no API exists for it, you have to build a custom extension. Now, keep in mind, too, this custom extension piece, if you're doing this now, if you're doing the migration strategy now, you probably, some of the customers we worked with over the years have been building these custom extensions in Java because they want the app to run on their Java devices as well. And then migrating that over to BlackBerry 10 would be their secondary step, which is the next slide. So you're identifying the classes in your that you weren't able to bring over to an API that exists in HTML5, and then take those custom extensions that you've built in WebWorks already or identified in your Java version and build for BlackBerry 10. Now remember that custom extensions in BlackBerry 10 are built using native code, so you'll have to know a little bit of C, C++, and or use the open source ones that are available, which there's a slide on in a bit. So any questions on the, I guess, short form migration strategy? Does it make sense on how you identify these functions and separate them from UI? So when you think about it, if your UI takes up 75% of your development time, you're 70 to 75% ahead of the game for BlackBerry 10 because your UI is going to be built in what is cross-platform standards. HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript can be used on any platform. Any new platform, I should say. So as you're going through it, you obviously want to test it. And one of the tools that we use most often is Ripple. Anyone here heard of Ripple before? Seen the hippo around? few people. So the RIPL is a Chrome extension. It was a Chrome extension, and then it was a standalone Windows app, and then it was a Chrome extension again. The nice part about it is you can actually load the framework you're building towards. So it supports PhoneGap 2. It supports WebWorks for the handheld, the tablet, and BlackBerry 10. And there's a few other ones in there too. And then it has some preloaded devices, so it has the device dimensions built in that you can build towards. And so you just load up a web page or some web assets in RIPL, and it displays them like it would display it on a device. Now, this is something that we run into a lot. Is it's not the exact same thing as a simulator or a real device for that matter. Remember, it's just an emulator. It's more for what we use it for is UI especially, and a little bit of code debugging. It ties some WebWorks APIs in there for testing, but if you are doing some very heavy development on towards device APIs, you'll want to run it on a real device, obviously. The simulators that are out there are obviously a great testing tool as well. They run in, for Playbook in BlackBerry 10, they run in VMware, and obviously the Java device ones run in Java Virtual Machine. Who here has heard of Web Inspector before? A few people? You'd be surprised at the number of customers we go into that haven't heard of Web Inspector. I probably answer one email a week about how do you debug your WebWorks apps. And so to do that, it's part of Chrome. It's part of actually any WebKit browser. And it's a Web Inspector allows you to do line-by-line debugging of your JavaScript, inspect elements of the page like HTML5 or HTML and CSS. The cool thing is you can inspect an element on the page and see what CSS is actually applied to it. It's great for ripping off code. It's good for optimizing your code. We have a friend of ours, or a colleague of ours, that is great at optimization. He uses this all the time. Now, the other cool thing about this, so this Web Inspector is part of Chrome, so you would most often use it within RIPL, but you can actually compile your application with a flag that's called debug mode, and that means when you start up your app, it prompts you and says, connect to this IP address on the same network, obviously, Wi-Fi network, and you'll be able to see the code behind your actual application. So now you're debugging your application on a real device in real time and being able to step through it and see the code as it progresses. So it's really handy for debugging, profiling, optimizing, anything you want to do that would normally be around your testing cycle. Make sense? Usually if you have it connected via USB, I said Wi-Fi before, you can connect over Wi-Fi or USB, you would connect to this URL here, and the port usually stays at 1337. So if you go there, you would click a link, and it would actually open up all this code that sits behind your application. Yep. So you can only debug them if they have their flag set as well, right? So if you went to this URL on your device of, say, a third-party app, you wouldn't be able to see any of their information because they haven't set their debug flag to true. So that's the key piece there, is that when you compile your application for testing, you set that flag, and that enables you to connect to Web Inspector. So anyone you download at App World won't have that set, unfortunately. Would be fun, though. Any other questions? All right, so I'm going to do a walkthrough of how I took a basic application and migrated it to BlackBerry 10. But first I wanted to show it to you in a demo. Oh, yeah. This session is all WebWorks because it's part of that was the migration strategy we chose for this session, yeah. But keep in mind that all the stuff that I'm talking about could easily apply to Cascades or the native development kit, or AIR even, for that matter. It's all about identifying pieces that you need to migrate over. So can we switch over to the... It worked, that's promising. Let's see if the demo works. All right, so because I am not going to use an Elmo, I'm going to try and display the screen for you. which actually works better than Elmo. So here is a basic dashboard application that was written for Java. Come on, autofocus. Sorry. My hand isn't steady enough. I'll sit down. So you can see a lot of it is UI. And when you dive into some of the different features of the application, like a user dashboard, it lists a dashboard that would essentially be customized for that user. Now, the way that I chose to customize it was based off a pin. So you have an executive view if it's a certain pin, and kind of a cheat I threw in here to switch it over to an employee view based off if it was another pin. So if I go back, office locations, sorry, just invokes BlackBerry Maps. Come on. All right. My device is not agreeing with me here. And these two here would just display some more UI, like an inbox replica or a tasks application. So just a simple dashboarding application that was built in Java. I think it took our boss actually a couple days to write. And then when we converted it over to WebWorks, it looked like this. So what we did was we used a framework. Uh-oh. There we go. We used a framework called BBUI. And that helped us build out our UI components to make them, it actually looks nicer in my opinion than the Java one. You can see if I go into the user dashboard here, again, it would be dependent on the pin. You see the employee view. If it was another pin, you'd see an executive view. One note is the pin is different on BlackBerry 10, which I'll talk about later. If I go into office locations, instead of, this would be one of the things that, why invoke maps if you don't have to? If it's web, you could just embed some mapping software in there. So here we used, I believe it was Leaflet, the Leaflet library with Bing Maps, and displayed the different RIM locations from a JSON file. Of course, the back button is hidden a little bit. Messages, again, just replica of the inbox, and tasks, same deal. So just to show you the different UI pieces and how they tie into some of the application backend data. All right, so switch back to the. So what I did when I got this application, the Java app, from our boss, and we chose to migrate it, was I started to look at the different pieces. So the first step I did was UI. Do I want to reuse the UI that he did? Do I want to reuse the assets? Do I want to create a completely different UI? It all depends on how much time you have, what frameworks you want to use. You'll probably want to reuse as many of the assets as you can, like logos, icons, et cetera, because you've already got them approved by brand. And then you want to take what pieces of UI you can find and maybe cheat a little bit with some frameworks that we'll talk about in a little bit. So with this application, you can see here I took this Java code. All it is some Java elements that I've instantiated from a Java toolkit. Sorry for the small font size. Took those elements and added them to the screen one by one, and tied the field change listener to each of the buttons or other components that I'm using. When that translated over to my HTML5 application, you can see here I brought in the BBUI framework, so I'm using a framework. I'm cheating on the components. I don't have to build them pixel by pixel. I just have to follow the standard data BB type that is laid out in that framework. So here I'm just adding them all to the screen. And you can see this part here, or I guess in all these parts here, I'm applying a method or a function to each of those buttons. So easily identified and actually tied in more to how some of those methods run or tie themselves to a button or other component. So some of the classes that you may run into as you're identifying these pieces. Do you save data to the local application memory using persistence? If you do, you may want to look at something like HTML5 local storage and or the SQLite database. Leading into the next one, if you're using a Java database on the device, you may want to look at using SQLite on the HTML5 version. How you do your connections. So the neat thing about when you move over to WebWorks apps or Cascades apps is that you're actually using, in WebWorks, you're using Ajax, and in QML, you would be using either a JavaScript connector class, which could be Ajax as well, or one of the QML libraries. Whether or not you need device info, and then obviously how you want to tie system events like battery logging, or whether you're in coverage, push events, to actual code that would run when those events occur. So in that application that I just showed you, one of the main things, or one of the tie-ins to system apps that we did was we took the device pin and based the user dashboard off that device pin. So in Java, you just do a integer to hex string using the device info.get device ID, add it to the screen. In WebWorks, because this one here is for BlackBerry 10, we were named pin to UUID, FYI. I'm not sure why we did it, but we did. And to do that, to do what we did in the Java version, we just reference those global variables straight up. So keep in mind that some of these applications that you're converting over will not have APIs that convert over to WebWorks or Cascades. So what you will have to do in the situation for WebWorks is build an extension using Cascades or the native development kit using C and C++. So you want to make sure you identify this code, make sure it's useful for your application. If your users don't use it, why bother writing it, right? If it is a feature of the app that you could accomplish some other way, using some of the APIs that are already available, there's no point in writing the extension. You just do it that other way. So it requires some thought, but make sure that you do the step thoroughly, because obviously, being Java developers, you probably don't want to write too much C and C++. If you're like me, you haven't done it since school. So the next part there is not all apps need custom extensions. For instance, this small user dashboard obviously didn't use an extension. A lot of the ones we've done with our customers usually require 1 to 2 extensions. It just depends what they're doing. We were working with one customer that was accessing the persistent store, and that's how they were doing inter-process communication. So we actually had to write a persistence extension for Java to be able to talk to that application, talk to that other application, so that they could be ready for when BlackBerry 10 came, and they built it around the invocation framework instead. Hello, open source. So this is all about how I've been referring to these frameworks that exist out there. There is an HTML5 recipe that we've come up with, and it follows this sort of method, I guess. So you have your organization. Your app essentially consists of JavaScript libraries, one of these that you write yourself, one of these micro or macro frameworks, and HTML5, CSS3, and more JavaScript. So what you do when you're building these applications, one, build towards standards. All the major mobile platforms out there now support WebKit. This is promising for you guys. It makes things a lot easier. Build towards the HTML5 spec, and make sure you're using relatively useful CSS and JavaScript. For the most part, I think most browsers support as many of the ones you would use anyway. Frameworks. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are a ton of frameworks out there. The guy presenting next door to me here, Jim Ng, he is a framework master. If you have any crazy questions about frameworks, I'll probably refer you to him. He even wrote his own. But this is code that essentially people have written and rewritten themselves and figured someone else would probably use, so you guys might as well make use of the free resource as well. Some of the frameworks that exist that are, I guess, major players, Macro being the larger ones, jQuery Mobile and Sencha Touch. Micro, so smaller type frameworks. And when I say smaller, I mean smaller in code base. Zepto.js, which actually takes a lot of the jQuery commonly used stuff and has written in a smaller framework, and JQMobi. So first off is the light recipe. Now this would be if you want to support the smaller devices, the devices that have a limited amount of memory, a limited amount of processing power. Now keep in mind that when I say that, there's no reason that you could not build a light HTML5 app for BlackBerry 10 or one of these higher powered devices. It would actually probably run better. But the idea around the light recipe is pick and choose what you're going to use. There's no point in bringing down this mammoth framework that you're going to use maybe 5% of the functions in it. Take these small frameworks that exist like Zepto.js, which has the most common jQuery functions in it, and throw in something like Hammer.js, which includes all the touch events for swipe gestures and zoom, etc. So taking these, just the small pieces, you don't have to use all these, just the ones that you need for your application. So it's a pick and choose type recipe. The next one is the medium set, which is libraries that aren't small enough to be micro frameworks and not big enough to be these mammoth ones. So these ones are, I guess, more the middle ground. It could be micro or macro. And you can see here the event chaining one, JWorkflow, I was actually using a light framework because I couldn't find one that was medium. But things in here, I guess, that would I bring to your attention are BBUI would be considered one of these. What's another good one? The charting, so high charts and Easel.js are good ones. So they're that mid-range. Again, you don't need all of them. You just pick and choose which ones you would need within your medium recipe. And finally, the heavy frameworks. So these frameworks are ones that I guess most enterprises would get the most out of because this is how they all have built code as long as they've known. It's a framework that tries to include everything that you would ever need out of a framework. Things like jQuery, jQuery itself, jQuery mobile, Sensor Touch. You can see it spans a whole bunch of layers. But the idea here is that you probably wouldn't have to import any other micro framework because most of what you're looking for is in the major macro framework. Now, as I said before, make sure you may want to just do a hybrid approach where you take as many of the micro frameworks as you can. Everyone being a good developer wants to make sure their application is as lean and mean as it possibly can be, right? I see 2 thumbs up, a head shake, and some glassy eyes. Perfect. Again, because you're all good developers, you'll want to join our community. You're taking all these free frameworks. Why not give back? So here's where you can give back. You can contribute to our WebWorks samples. There's a repo there for extensions that we've written already and that people are starting to write for BlackBerry 10 as well. Those are the community API extensions. BlackBerry has a ton of toolkits in there. Alice.js and BBUI are the main ones. And I think there's something like 64 repositories now up on GitHub. Not all related to WebWorks. There's some in there for native as well. But definitely go here, rip off a bunch of code, try and contribute back when you find bugs or if you have some ideas that you want to contribute back up to the community so other people can use your code. You won't get paid, unfortunately, but you can feel good about yourself. That's what HJ does. It's how he feels bigger. All right, so some of the new stuff that I ran into while creating a BlackBerry 10 application. These are things that you definitely want to keep in mind. So first and foremost, when you build a BlackBerry 10 WebWorks application, you have to import webworks.js, usually with a version number attached to it. That webworks.js file comes from the SDK folder within the framework/client files subdirectory. And what this does is it actually preps the WebWorks application for these WebWorks APIs. Now, because you want to make sure those APIs exist before you start calling them, you do have to add this event listener to your window that just detects when WebWorks is ready. So once that WebWorks is ready, just do your regular app init stuff, and you can call BlackBerry.whatever as much as you want. One caveat, I guess, to this that I just found out today when I was repackaging the one for my Dev Alpha B here, you'll want to make sure that this webworks.js file, the version of it matches the SDK version. Because when I originally built it, obviously I built it previously, and it was a SDK that was released previously. And when today's was released, I tried to package it again, and it wasn't running, and I wondered why, and this was the reason. So keep that in mind. In your config.xml, there's a few changes and things that you may want to be aware of. You definitely have to include a widget ID. This wasn't a requirement before, but make sure that's there, otherwise your application will not package. I think it gives you a friendly warning if you don't put it there. There's also this cool piece here where you can start to add locale and resolution-dependent icons and splash screens. So right now, BB10 is one resolution, but previously, or I guess in the future, we've announced that we're going to be adding more phones, so there may be some different resolutions. And when that happens, you may want to target a specific splash screen for that given device. And this is how you do it. You don't actually have to write any code. You just have to make sure that you have whatever your image name is, dash, whatever resolution you're trying to target. Same goes for icons. It is also resolution dependent. It's based off DPI, I guess. And then if you want to support different locales, so based off whatever the user has set their home language on within the device, you can actually put within the locales / whatever your language code is, ES would be obviously Spanish, and then your icon name, it will automatically detect that exists and replace your icon and your splash screen with that locale version of it. Make sense? Of course it does. I like thumbs up. Garrett, you can come to my session anytime. Next within config would be the ability to invoke your application. Now this is kind of cool because really you're writing XML as opposed to writing any JavaScript or other code. You add this to your config.xml. The main piece, obviously you want to call it invoke-target. You want to add an ID if you want to be able to have other apps invoke you directly. And then you want to add a filter. Now what these filters do is I guess they serve two purposes. One is the ability for another application to query the invocation framework to see what app would work best for what it's trying to open. And the other one would be the different MIME types you want to support within your application. So you can see here, this one just supports opening the text file MIME type. You can add extensions, file extensions in here as well, which helps your query. You can also add, what's the other thing that you can add? File URIs, that's it. So if you want to only be able to invoke your application if a file invoke is or an invoke is coming with a URI that has, I don't know, file // on it. So just by specifying this one here, it makes my app available to open text files. And you can have multiple MIME types. You can even have multiple filters if you want, based off of what file extension you're trying to hit. Do you guys understand what the invocation framework is when I talk about that? I just realized that maybe you haven't attended one of those sessions. The invocation framework is what allows other apps to either invoke your app or invoke just a set of apps that open a certain type. It also is what powers push and other stuff. Next, you'll want to take into consideration screen sizes. So this is an important one, and one that I actually came across again when I was building my demo. The meta viewport tag was something that we've always supported on Playbook and previous 6 and 7 devices. That no longer exists, or it exists, I guess, but it causes your application to do this because of this target density DPI. The reason we removed this is because it's not a WebKit standard. It was something that Google had thrown in, so we decided to throw in as well. But we don't want to break web apps. We want to keep everything as standard as we can, so this is what we did. To get back to just the normal view, all I had to do was remove my meta tag. So it was an easy fix. You could even specify your own custom viewport if you wanted to as well. I have to throw mad props to Adam Stanley. I'm not sure if you guys know him or not, but he's the one that provided me with this slide. Next is events. So BlackBerry.event.add event listener and remove event listener. These are to be able to detect things like your application pausing, resuming, or if you're swiping down from the top. So these are all application-specific events. Obviously, you have to include your config.xml. You have to include a reference to BlackBerry.app for these. But these are important because when your application, when I swipe up, my application is becoming a pause, or is becoming paused. So you want to make sure you're saving your application state in case your application gets closed at that point by the OS itself or by the user. Obviously, the menu one, or the swipe down, is to detect if you want to add a menu. There are system events in there that you can listen to, things like the battery and whether the battery is getting low. Connection events, if you're out of coverage, if you have data coverage, what type of data coverage you have, VPN, Wi-Fi, carrier, MDS, or bridge. And then there's an invoked event that when your application actually is invoked, how am I going to handle that invocation and the data that comes with it? Some of the notable APIs that are here already and that are coming for the, at least what I think will be important in the enterprise, file transfer, the ability to download and upload files, invoke, which we've talked about. Push is an important one. So we've always touted our push availability and how well we do push. That is here already for consumer-type applications. When BB10 gets released, there will also be a server piece with that, BDS, that will enable that on the enterprise side, so being able to push to your enterprise-specific devices as well. Some of the things that are coming soon, invoke cards. We also saw that in the keynote. Being able to have your app appear like it's in another application using a card as opposed to having to minimize and launch your application. Using the context menu, so pressing and holding brings up a context menu now on your devices. That's coming to WebWorks as well. And then being able to tie into contacts and calendars, I believe, is coming in November. So some of the PIM-type data that enterprises are always asking about. Messages, tying into the messaging, or the inbox is coming as well, but I think that's afterwards. I think I'm hitting buttons here that I shouldn't be hitting. If there are APIs you're looking for, and I haven't specified them here, if you go to this URL, developer.blackberry.com/HTML5/download/roadmap, it actually lists the different APIs that we've released that are coming soon and that are on the roadmap. If there's any you don't see that you need and you're an enterprise, definitely talk to one of the RIM people around here to try and get it into the roadmap for a future release. This slide here was just to tell you that you can contribute your custom extensions to the WebWorks community. There's already a template up there that walks through the different components that you actually need to do this. There's a great README that walks through the different what the different files are and everything. But this is essentially the first custom extension that was written for native for the WebWorks API. So the more people we get contributing to this, the better our API set gets. And it's possible if the API is used a lot, it might even get pulled into the actual framework itself. And at that point, I just assume you must get hired by RIM. This is a slide that actually just showed up here without me putting it in. let's talk more. So I'm going to be at the round tables tonight, I guess, in Exhibition Hall 1 at 6 p.m. I hope there's beer there, and if there's not, I'm going to be looking forward to it at 7. And use these hashtags on Twitter if you're a big Twitter person. Oh, wait, there's more? Don't forget. Oh, yeah, download the conference app. It's on App World. The appreciative. Great question. I mean, so I don't know. I think it was a third party that we hired that did that, but I totally agree with you. And I'm sorry, this is getting recorded. I'll probably be fired for that. The appreciation event is at 7 p.m. tonight. We can all have beers and complain about the conference app. And make sure you give us our reasons to believe in BlackBerry, either via Twitter or by the reasons booth in the jam space, which we've all passed. I think I photobombed at least 10 people today without even realizing it. There were so many cameras out on that floor. All right, guys, thanks so much. Come chat again at 6 p.m., and I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'll be around here for the next 10 or so minutes. All right, thanks.